Scenes of a war that have passed into the history books. The heroism, the folly, the courage have all been written about. Yet one great mission of World War II has remained secret for over half a century. It was carried out far from the battlefields in a land as hostile and remote as any on Earth. And with an enemy even more relentless than the war machines of Europe. On April 6, 1940, Hitler invades Denmark. The invasion comes 7 months after World War II had been officially declared. It takes only days for Denmark to fall. Around the world, the effects are immediately felt. Suddenly, with Denmark now occupied, the German threat to the Danish colony Greenland in the North Atlantic is of great concern. But there is an even more important reason, one that catches the attention of Berlin, Washington, London, and Ottawa. At the end of a 12-mile fjord in southwest Greenland, there is a mine. It produces the mineral cryolite, vital to the production of aluminum. Cryolite is essential in the manufacture of warplanes, desperately needed for the war in Europe. The mine, located on the ocean, is now vulnerable to attack by the German Navy. On the east coast of Canada, 250 men are secretly mobilized in a force that is to be sent to Greenland. Their mission is to secure the cryolite mine and defend it against attack. But the secret force lacks one critical element: a communications and support vessel. The only ship available is the unlikeliest of choices, an ungainly wooden ship named the St. Roch, now under the command of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Only 104 feet long, she is painfully slow, powered by a small diesel engine with less horsepower than most cars. The St. Roch's hull is made of Douglas fir with a covering of extra-hard Australian gumwood, which it is hoped will withstand the crushing Arctic ice. But a problem even greater than the precarious nature of the ship itself is its location. The St. Roch is based in Vancouver, on Canada's Pacific West Coast, a world from where it is desperately needed in Greenland, 10,000 miles away. 1 week after the Danish defeat, the captain of the St. Roch, Sergeant Henry Larsen, is ordered to an urgent and secret meeting with an officer sent by headquarters. The purpose of the meeting is simple and daunting: to see if Larsen believes there's any chance of sailing his slow and outdated vessel all the way through the Arctic and then on to Greenland. To those who know Henry Larsen, his answer is utterly predictable: the Northwest Passage. For Larsen, it is the opportunity of a lifetime. His immediate answer is yes, and one of the most intriguing missions of World War II has begun. It is a voyage that no one has ever made before. North, up the Pacific coast, around Alaska, and across the Arctic Ocean. then into the ice-clogged and hostile Northwest Passage, en route to the Atlantic. The quest for a passage from the old world to the new has attracted explorers since the 15th century. Hundreds of men and dozens of ships have been lost in the attempt. Against this historic peril, the events of the war are being played out in complex circumstances. The Canadians have overlooked one crucial element: American foreign policy under Roosevelt. An unexpectedly intense diplomatic feud breaks out when Roosevelt blocks the attempts of Canadian Prime Minister Mackenzie King to send the troops to Greenland. Roosevelt is trapped in a crush of isolationist and commercial forces, among them pressure from a large aluminum company in Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, in the dry dock on Canada's west coast, work continues day and night to prepare the little ship for its mission. No one knows the ship like Larsen, and in the final days before sailing, he personally supervises the work. While this is happening, the Canadian Prime Minister returns to Ottawa from his meeting with Roosevelt and explains to his disappointed war cabinet that the Americans have prevailed. The 250 men will not be sent to Greenland. British and Canadian anxiety mounts. The orders for the St. Roch remain unchanged. There's a sense of urgency to even the most ordinary tasks. They now face a 10,000-mile journey, and Arctic freeze-up is only 90 days away. In Europe, Hitler sweeps westward, virtually unchallenged. The Netherlands, Belgium, France, their defenses crumble. Soon, Europe has a new master. The Allies are poorly prepared for war. Britain and the Commonwealth scramble to mount a defense. Larsen selects his crew from the best he can find. First mate Jacques Ferrar, an old Arctic hand. As his dad Parry, both cook and deckhand. And Albert Chartrand, the amiable French-Canadian who has spent years with Larsen in the north. But some, like 19-year-old Dean Hadley, have grown up on the prairies, expecting to follow the traditional land-based career of a mounted policeman.
I had for a long time wanted to be a ship's radio operator. I'd never seen the ship, I had no idea what it was, but it was a chance to be a ship's radio operator, so I volunteered.
And Pat Hunt, who had no idea of what life in the Arctic would or could be like.
I'd never seen anything bigger than a lake, let alone the ocean. I walked down and over to the side, and here's this, the tide is out. Those two sticks were the masts of the St. Roch. I thought, holy God, am I going up north on that thing?
On June 21st, 1940, the St. Roch quietly leaves Vancouver Harbor. The night before departure, Jacques Ferrar and Pat Hunt buy a small movie camera in a pawn shop. They now begin filming the voyage, starting with their captain, Henry Larsen. Larsen has kept the secret. The crew is totally unaware of the mission's real purpose. July 1940. The skies over England are filled with aerial dogfights as an exhausted Royal Air Force is all that stands between Hitler and his invasion of Britain. Now, with heavy losses to their already small air force, the British are even more hard-pressed to safeguard the supplies of aluminum. So desperate are matters that the government sends out an appeal for housewives to surrender their aluminum cooking pots. They can be turned into planes. For the St. Roch, even in the first few weeks of the voyage, it is as if the weather is scattering omens, testing the crew for what lies ahead. A month out, Larsen assembles the crew and tells them they are bound for the Northwest Passage.
When we arrived at Dutch Harbor, the skipper called the crew on deck and read the sealed orders which said that we were to proceed through the Northwest Passage instead of returning to Vancouver, and offered the people on the crew the opportunity to leave the ship or leave the crew if they did not want to proceed with the ship through to the East Coast. Nobody accepted the offer.
A few days later, the St. Roch leaves tiny Dutch Harbor to sail westward before she can turn north into the Bering Straits between Alaska and the Soviet Union. They now sail into a mercurial world they have only before imagined. To the newest crew members, it is as if they have just burst into a world of strange serenity. The old Arctic hands know this is a land where the days of tranquility and beauty can be obliterated by weather as fierce as anywhere in the world. Conditions are soon to become as bad as Larsen has ever seen in an Arctic summer. Massive ice flows slow their progress. The mission's timetable is immediately threatened. In the sanctuary of his cabin, Larsen weighs the odds of the St. Roch making it through the Northwest Passage before the ice traps them. In Greenland, the diplomatic bickering reaches a crisis point. The Canadian government has sent a cargo ship attempting to take on a load of the precious cryolite. But local Danish authorities and American warships immediately blockade the cargo ship. Aided by a contribution of all the liquor on the cargo ship, the Canadians are allowed to slip into port, load the cryolite, and then quietly depart with 1,500 tons of the precious mineral. '40 is proving to be among the century's worst years for ice. As the St. Roch pushes its way across the top of the world, the prevailing winds drive heavy polar ice down into their path. With the St. Roch wedged in ice, Larsen orders the crew to blast their way out with explosive charges. In the 3 weeks after they leave Point Barrow, Alaska, they move a mere 400 miles. On Saturday, August 31st, weeks behind schedule, they arrive at the RCMP detachment at Copper Mine. At Copper Mine, Constable Bill Peters, an engineer, expectantly joins the ship. He has arranged to meet his fiancée in Halifax in just 6 weeks. On September 8th, in deceptively tranquil summer weather, they reach Cambridge Bay, unloading the last of the supplies and taking on more sled dogs. By early autumn 1940, the threat to Greenland intensifies. German warplanes and ships are spotted far out in the North Atlantic, and their U-boats are exacting a fearful toll on the Allied convoys. But for Larsen and the St. Roch, the toll is being exacted by more natural enemies. Wind, snow, and ice are conspiring to slow them even more. Larsen has no choice now but to accept the inevitable. The St. Roch will not make it through the passage this year. Immediately, he begins looking for a safe harbor in which to anchor and surrender to winter's icy stranglehold. On September 26th, shortly before freeze-up, they anchor in Walker Bay. She is now 5,220 miles away from home port, yet only halfway to her destination. The concerns of the outside world count for much less now. The war in Europe, the mine in Greenland. There is nothing the crew can do but wait for the next year. Now they face the cruel winter and its perpetual night. The challenge now is survival. Immediately their work begins. A canvas housing must be fastened across the ship, sealing it from the elements and creating a workshop. Fishing nets must be set into the freezing lakes. Each dog will eat 6 pounds per day. The crew first locates a freshwater lake, then sets to work with large ice saws. They will need fully 40 tons for the winter's drinking. During these days, a common bond among the crew is intensified. It is another kind of barrier against the ordeal they each sense lies ahead. Pat Hunt remembers those days of unquestioning loyalties.
Well, I was a deckhand on that particular trip, which meant a jack of all trades and master of none, really. And as far as I was concerned, I just was told what to do by the captain, and I did it. And if I didn't do it right, he let me know, and I'd do it over again, you see.
Larsen again proves himself a natural leader, asking nothing of his men he will not do himself.
You felt very close kinship with the man. He was able to communicate very, very well, and you didn't feel under any particular type of discipline except you did what he wanted done. And in turn, he taught us an awful lot about the ocean, about the ship, and about how to get from one place to another safely.
With the ship now frozen in the ice, Larsen and the crew make the transition from sailors to explorers and policemen. They face a new kind of challenge. Traveling by dog sled with Inuit guides, they search out isolated settlements, seeking information from the hardy native people. They're often away from the ship for weeks, exposed to severe weather conditions with temperatures of 40 degrees below or worse. Many previous explorers ignored the native Inuit people, and they perished. Larsen does not make this mistake. He and others in the crew, especially Chartrand, have immersed themselves in the native culture and have learned to speak their language. Inuit guidance has been important in the past. It will be crucial to their future. In his diaries, Larsen will later write,
"The Eskimos are probably some of the most remarkable people in the world. One cannot help but admire them, their helpfulness to one another, and their resourcefulness in hard times."
If the ice is a captor, it is also a protector. It keeps the St. Roch locked into Walker Bay, yet it also protects the mine in Greenland from attacks by ships and submarines. The days shorten into slivers of light, and the winter fastens around the ship. It is a journey that should have ended months earlier. Yet Larsen knows that even greater dangers are ahead, in the heart of the Northwest Passage. Beginning in September of 1940, the Germans target London in what is known as the Blitz. By the spring of 1941, Britain and the Commonwealth are barely able to contain the German offensives. England braces for invasion, while the Americans remain officially neutral. But to the crew of the St. Roch, the outside world seems somehow a world away.
The news of the war, actually we felt that we were on top of the world looking down on this thing, and it just wasn't real. Everything was so peaceful up here, you know. Yet 3,000 or 4,000 miles away, they're bombing the hell out of each other. It was just unreal. Just unreal. We had duties to do. We had to take the census of the Inuit at that time, and we traveled, I'm sure, about 1,000 miles by dog team and sleeping in snow houses. There was plenty to do, plenty to do.
The events that lie ahead of them intensify. The Germans have sent their huge battleship, the Bismarck, into the North Atlantic. Allied naval sinkings approach 100,000 tons a month. Greenland is now so vulnerable that the Canadian Vice Consul cables Ottawa with his assessment that a landing party with 6 men with Tommy guns could capture and destroy the mine. In the Arctic, the days are at last becoming longer, and the crew begins to dig the ship out of the ice. The St. Roch is scraped and painted, and its equipment overhauled in preparation for the ordeal ahead. Not until July 31st, after fully 10 months trapped in the ice, do the St. Roch and her crew at last depart from Walker Bay. Once again, Larsen's great journey is underway. For Larsen, it is the first time he has left the relatively familiar terrain of the Western Arctic. Now he is sailing into unknown territory, into the true magnetic north, where compasses suddenly become useless. In these waters, almost 100 years earlier, the two ships of the British explorer Sir John Franklin had been destroyed and abandoned. Franklin and his men died in an ill-fated search for the same Northwest Passage that Larsen is now pursuing. Meanwhile, in Greenland, the United States is finally setting up military camps. In the summer of 1941, the threat of an actual invasion forces the feuding allies into an agreement. Although America has still not officially entered the war, it begins a buildup that includes both air and naval protection. The war still rages, concern over Canadian sovereignty increases, and Larsen, above all, remains determined to make it through. What remains now is purely a matter of survival. In the very heart of the Northwest Passage, depth soundings are taken continuously as the force of the wind and the ice drives them down the McClintock Channel. They desperately seek shelter as conditions deteriorate. In the terror-filled hours, the crew can do nothing but pray, wait, and listen to the violent attacks of ice that crash incessantly upon the ship. For Larsen, the original purposes of the voyage have slipped away, in some ways liberating him, in other ways compelling him to a purer and perhaps deadlier quest of man against nature, the unknown, and himself. As always, it is nature that strikes the cruelest blows.
At the time that we were being pushed over the sandbar, certainly we were worried because it's going on 4 o'clock in the morning. The boat is up on a sandbar, 5 feet higher out of the water than it should be. It gets turned around twice by the ice pressure. We're told to prepare to abandon ship, and you look out and it's snowing and blowing and it's miserable, it's cold and it's dark.
With an almost supernatural whimsy, the ice plays with the St. Roch as if it is a toy. The ship is carried deep into Pasley Bay, and the light of morning reveals their destiny for yet another year. For a second year, Larsen faces the prospect of failure. On Friday, September 12th, he records the inevitable.
Vessel frozen in solid. No opportunity now of getting out. We are disappointed that we cannot complete the voyage this year. We know at least that we have come so far that there is no question of turning back.
But in all of 1941, they had been sailing for only 6 weeks. Once again, the ship is prepared for the oncoming winter. This time in a location more than 150 miles from the closest native settlement. Food is scarce, and the nearest freshwater lake is an exhausting trek from the ship. Hanging around them now, like some shroud of history, is the legacy of earlier Arctic explorers who had perished in this very area. Even the natives' pots and pans are made from metal scavenged from dead ships. Easing the maelstrom of moods and anxieties now felt by the crew is the relentless good humor of Albert Chartrand, known to them all as Frenchie.
Well, on February the 13th, 1942, in Paisley Bay, I slept in my bunk across there, and I got up, and Frenchie was sitting up in bed in his bunk, and I was going to go up for breakfast. And Frenchie was saying, oh. I said, what's the matter, Frenchie? He said, oh, geez, I got indigestion. If I could only burp, I think is the word he used. And I said, well, you better come and have some. No, he said, I'm going to stay here. And so I went, had breakfast, come back here. Frenchie was lying dead on the floor just where you're sitting there. He knew almost every Inuit family by name for 1,000 miles along the Arctic coast. That's the type of man he was.
More than anyone else, Chartrand had provided the crew with a kind of humor and style. His death is shattering. As Larsen later puts it,
It was our darkest hour.
Determined that Chartrand should be buried with the rituals of his Catholic church, Larsen set out with Pat Hunt on a 400-mile overland dog sled trek to the remote settlement of Pelly Bay, where a priest lives with the local Inuit. A crude stone cairn is to serve as Chartrand's memorial. Father Gustav Henry performs the burial ceremony as they all pay their final respects to the most popular member of the crew. It is as if Chartrand's death is in varying parts an omen, a low point, and an unspoken fear that has suddenly broken out of their thoughts. For the first time, the specter of death becomes a reality. Even Larsen now has second thoughts. In his diary, he writes to his wife,
Mary, dear, I'd like to spend a few years home with you and the children. And I do not wish to go north anymore if I can help it.
The words are written at a time when the crew are more urgently aware than ever that what has brought them this far is the wisdom and willpower of their captain. Spring thaw comes late, and in August 1942, after 11 months, the St. Roch breaks free of the ice in Paisley Bay. But this time, even from the very first day of escape, they have to fight for their survival, threading their way out of the bay around the remnants of the previous year's ice floes. In many ways, their fears are justified. They are being dragged into the very heart of the passage, where so many other ships have been crushed. By August 8th, they are drifting, imprisoned in the moving ice. Larsen later writes, on several occasions, I feared the vessel was doomed. At last, a small gap opens up, and for the first time that summer, they head north at full speed. On August 12th, in the early afternoon, engineers Jack Foster and Bill Peters hear one of the worst noises of their lives at sea. The number one cylinder head in the 150 horsepower diesel engine cracks and is flooding. For a day, The engineers work frantically as the ship drifts out of control. They remove the piston from the #1 cylinder, in effect, shutting it down and creating a 5-cylinder engine. The maximum speed of the already slow vessel is now reduced to just 5 miles an hour. For the 3rd year, summer is slipping away almost before it has begun. Never in all his experience in the Arctic has Larsen encountered such continuously malevolent conditions. Again, in his understated words, he notes,
These difficulties test the spirit of even the most optimistic among us.
On Wednesday, August 26th, clinging to an ice floe that carries them where it chooses, they are swept into waters off the Tasmania Islands. In the entire voyage, this is the most critical moment of choice for Larsen. There are 2 ways to escape into the Atlantic. He can sail north through the wider and safer channel, but once more risk being frozen into the ice for yet another year, one they are not likely to survive. Or he can make a run for it, taking a treacherous shortcut, heading into the unknown terrors of the narrow Bellot Strait. Larsen chooses the Bellot Strait. They make it into the mouth of the strait, a channel only half a mile wide with fast-moving currents that merge into whirlpools which threaten to spin the St. Roch into a vortex of destruction. By 7 that evening, they make their fateful commitment from which there can be no return and are swept eastward into the narrow 18-mile-long channel. To Larsen, it was like looking into a tunnel. In the terror of these moments, huge chunks of ice sweep in behind the ship like giant floating boulders. And the whirlpools suck at the ship, nearly upending it as it gyrates wildly like a kayak in rapids. Halfway through the strait, they are suddenly hurled into view of the most terrifying sight of the entire 2-year voyage. Just ahead, a massive ice barrier is jammed across the entire strait. Driven by the tide, the St. Roch rams into this frozen wall of ice. As the ice forces the ship over on its side, pandemonium breaks out. Such is the strain on the ship that at any moment it seems she might crack open like a nut. And then the miracle happens. A smaller ice floe comes hurtling past them, swept by the raging current. It acts like a wedge, cracking the huge ice barrier open. They are free. They've broken through the heart of the Northwest Passage. Larsen's gamble has paid off. A half-century later, Pat Hunt and Dean Hadley stand on the cliffs overlooking the strait where as young mounted police constables on the St. Roch, they almost perished.
Well, what is stamped in my memory, as if it was yesterday, is these cliffs over here. When he said, prepare to abandon ship, I looked over there. There was no place to go.
If you look out and see all this ice churning around and look at the cliffs on both sides, and you kind of wonder what your options are. None of them are very good. I think he thought maybe that was the end of the St. Roch.
Well, I don't know, I used to think all the miracles were described in the Bible, but right now I'm thinking that was one.
It seems like it's forever, but it was a fairly short time that the ice started to ease up a little bit and the boat turned and started going down with no power. And then we turned around and went on down the strait to Fort Ross. And I think everybody was ready for a stiff one. Yeah.
For Larsen, it is his crowning achievement. No one has ever before led an expedition through the Northwest Passage from the Pacific to the Atlantic. Like men trapped in a time capsule, they emerge into a world that in some ways seems harsher and more alien than the one they have passed through. It is a time of wary jubilation as they sail down from the emptiness of the eastern Arctic into an Atlantic Ocean that seems to fill with military support ships. Almost immediately, the realities of war are thrust upon them as they pass the cargo ships and encounter a crowded ferry boat during its last tragic moments.
We had passed a ferry that ran from Halifax to Newfoundland. And when we arrived in Sydney the next morning, we understood that that ferry had been sunk by a German submarine. And I think there was a lot of casualties. It was the first time the war had really hit us, you know, for 2.5 years.
Larsen cannot help but compare his little ship to the others they pass on their way into the harbor. He notes,
These East Coast ships are like graceful schooners, and alongside them the St. Roch looks like an ugly duckling, short and squat, and different from anything ever seen on this coast.
at last, on October the 11th, 1942, after 27 months in the worst conditions of the century, the St. Roch sails triumphantly into Halifax, Nova Scotia. The men of the St. Roch have accomplished the unprecedented, but the ship is quickly drawn again into the war and spends the next year on Eastern Arctic patrol. The news of the ugly duckling's triumph spreads, and soon word comes from London. King George VI has awarded Larsen and his men the Polar Medal. One medal is awarded posthumously. Albert Chartrand's memorial still stands today in Pasley Bay.
How do you feel coming back here like this?
I'm not sure. It's great to be back, but this particular one is not a happy moment.
Golly, it's in good shape.
The button is still on that we soldered on it. 8th October 1904 to 13th of February 1942. A regimental number 10155. Constable Albert Joseph Chartrand, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, schooner St. Roch. Try over here, you got a little bit of moss or something going right here.
Can't say anything. Years.
For Henry Larsen and the entire crew of the St. Roch, the lure of the Arctic is to endure for the rest of their lives. In 1944, the St. Roch is called north once again to assert Canadian sovereignty. She returns to Vancouver through the Northwest Passage in just 89 days. Larsen had been sworn to secrecy and took the secret to his grave. The full story of this mission would await this telling. The journey of the St. Roch has passed into the history of great explorations. Today, for the modern icebreakers that fight their way through Arctic channels named for the famous earliest explorers, there remains at the very heart of the Northwest Passage the most difficult journey of all. One that must be made through what is now named for that little ship and her crew, Larsen Sound.